The issue is rules and regulations of government. And the question is, do you think that members of Congress should be banned from buying and trading stocks?
Yes.
Yes.
Welcome to Political Playlist.
All right. Are we ready, guys?
Happy hour.
Happy hour. We fucked that up so bad.
God.
I mean,
Boo.
next issue.
Next issue. Okay. Voting rights.
Every single
I
year, we have to go through this issue of members of
Wait,
Congress.
I didn't even get to say the title of it. I should have said the title first.
Your question was so good. Like we're pouncing.
Okay.
Also, we're men and we're not good listeners.
I'm going to do it again with the title because I like my title, even though it's not as funny as Michael's.
Oh, I feel like we're riffing. This is great.
Okay. Well, you can edit it, whatever. Line them up and stock them down.
Wow, I'm so glad we waited for that.
Wait, that's so good.
The issue is rules and regulations of government. And the question is, do you think that members of Congress should be allowed to buy and trade stock? Anthony?
No.
Okay, well, just so you know, 75% of the country supports that. So
God, I appeal with the much.
Let me just give you a quick chronology of why I'm asking this question. Representative Abigail Spanberger, who's one of my faves, she's one of these women that never gets talked about, but gets shit done.
Yeah,
Virginia.
Virginia. She
what
proposed,
district for extra bonus points?
Ooh, I don't know.
All right, if you don't know, take a shot.
A shot? Okay, I'll take a sip of my wine.
I want to say 7th district.
Maybe. I don't know. We'll get back to you on that one. So Abigail Spanberger proposed a bill over a year ago called the Trust Act, bipartisan bill with a very conservative member of the House named Chip Roy from Texas. And the Trust Act essentially said that members of Congress could not buy or trade stocks. They had to put them in a blind trust. Abigail herself, she and her husband sold all of their stocks before she entered Congress, except one that her husband had that was wrapped up in an employment compensation. And her reasoning behind this was very simple. She said, Congress doesn't have a great approval rating. To do this gets people to trust us. It's called the Trust Act. It's not saying that people are criminals. It's just saying we have bad public perception out there. So
also, her husband being like locked up in a company one, that's totally fine too. You can't.
He has no control over that. It's like in his thing. So
poor Jimmy Carter sold his peanut farm.
So the reason we're talking about this now, because by the way, this happened over a year ago, kind of came and went. Now, what has happened is that there was a study done by Business Insider recently found that 52 members of Congress violated what is called the Stock Act, which says that members of Congress have to report within 45 days any trading or buying of stocks. And there were 52 members that violated this law. So that kind of kicked into gear two of our other young politicians, Jon Ossoff and Josh Hawley. Their bills are kind of different, which we can go into after we, talk a little bit about this. But basically, we now have Jon Ossoff, who's a fairly progressive member of the Democratic Party, Josh Hawley, who is a very conservative member of the Republican Party, Abigail Spanberger, who's a moderate Democrat, Chip Roy, this older guy from Texas, who's a very conservative Republican. We have a House bill. We have 2 Senate bills. And there's bipartisan support now growing around this because Nancy Pelosi, when asked about this, she literally dismissed it. And she said, this is a free market. People should be able to participate in the free market. And it was very flagrant how she responded to it, which then got everyone who feels this way, whether they're Republican or Democrat, say, how can you be so flagrant in responding to this question? Because they were about the study, and her husband is an investor who frequently trades stocks, and Pelosi is among the wealthiest members of Congress. Although she does not own any stocks herself, her husband is tied up in a shitload of them. So, what do you think?
I'm definitely for members of Congress not being allowed to trade stocks. Hands down, absolutely. I think it gets a little tough when it comes to your spouse. Because what about if you were married to someone who that's their job?
Right. Well, the idea is they would have to sacrifice something for you to be an elected official.
Yeah. And I mean, but when that's your career, that's a pretty difficult thing to say, just figure out another career. While you were just saying this in the Anthony world of dictatorship, I think everyone should actually be allowed to trade stocks, but 50% of those profits have to go to something in Congress or for the U.S.
So let me tell you that part of John Hawley's bill is that the penalty for breaking the law, his law, if the bill became
is that you get reelected.
is that whatever profits you made illegally off of that stock trade or purchase has to go to the Department of Treasury and giving it back to the American people. That's the penalty. So it's not, it's different than what you're saying. But
yeah, I'd like it to be a little bit more defined than just going back to the government.
On Ossoff's bill, it's just a strict fine on a member of Congress's salary.
So are we, just to clarify here, are we saying that Jon Ossoff and Josh Hawley are kind of aligned on this?
They're very aligned. The only difference, so those are the differences lie in the punishment, which is what I was just saying. And then the one difference is that in Jon Ossoff's bill, this would extend to spouses and dependent children. In Josh Hawley's bill, it's just elected members and their spouses. And Anthony, I hear what you're saying from like a sort of intellectual sense that if your spouse...
Well, hold on. I'm sorry. Did you just say Anthony and intellectual in the same
Everything
sentence?
I say is intellectual.
I hated myself as soon as I said it.
You knew it.
But from like a sense of making a living and having a career, I get it. But there have been a number of elected officials who have been caught essentially making decisions on their investments based on, insider knowledge that they have. And to say that like, you're not going to share the honor.
Well, here's the tough thing too, is I'm sorry, but like the tough thing for me is, especially Nancy Pelosi, she's from, the Bay Area. You're sitting next to some of the biggest Silicon Valley people ever. And I remember reading something where her husband made a bunch on Apple stock, and Steve Jobs used to be very involved, and Tim Cook. And I'm like, yeah, you sit down with the guy and he's like, you're like, hey, how's everything going? And he's like, I have something that's going to change music. And you're
it's
like,
going
I think I'm up in stock.
Shouldn't exist, right? Like that's the reason why you shouldn't be able
what else are you going to talk about when you sit with him?
But I'm saying that's the reason why they shouldn't be allowed to trade or buy stocks.
I personally don't agree that
interesting.
You should. Okay. Now I will say, just to point out,
it's a harder issue when you talk it out, to be honest.
Interestingly
I've
enough,
stuck to my guns. You guys have shifted.
Interestingly enough, one of the reasons that Georgia flipped blue, if we recall, Kelly Loeffler, who Raphael Warnock defeated, she got caught up in a little.
So did
COVID
David Perdue, by the way.
And and so there is some irony there. I think there's a very clear line between if you receive information in a classified intelligence briefing and then go make some stock trades,
you should definitely get in trouble for that.
Yeah, that feels highly illegal.
Yeah.
But
okay.
I don't think that any family member should have to give up what they do because their spouse or their family member decides to run for public office. In fact, quite the opposite. I
have a question though. Like because I hear what you're saying, that yes, if that activity is going on, it should be investigated and that should not be legal. But I think that where it gets hard with a spouse is that it's much harder to go in and put in like a mechanism to potentially investigate somebody's spouse and go through Nancy Pelosi's husband's Rolodex of stock trading and decipher what maybe is influenced by the committees that she's sitting on and what maybe isn't influenced by the information that she has. Yeah. So I think that the reason that I would support this is because at some point in government, you have to create a law that is a blanket rule for everybody. Does implementing a ban like this accomplish what Abigail Spanberger says, which is give the American public faith, a new kind of faith in elected officials? And that, I'm an emotional person. That struck an emotional chord with me, because how many people do you talk to who say politicians are all corrupt?
For sure.
They're all
I think this would.
Some money. And I feel like, honestly, it's a fucking disaster right now. And in my opinion, and I think you guys share this, the only way that we get out of this disaster is if we start to actually believe our government can do something and think that all these people in there are not just in it for like the power and the money, even though some of them are. I think we believe that some of them are not. And this to me is a rule. Maybe the rule doesn't last forever. This is a rule that would reinvigorate that faith.
There's rules in place for public CEOs and people who work at public companies on how they can trade and sell and buy stocks. And the fact that we do not have them for our politicians is outrageous.
So you're in support, but maybe not as sweeping as these young politicians.
There's always a solution. There's always a solution.
Oh, look how optimistic.
Unfortunately, we have 3 or 4 different people proposing 4 different 3 or 4 bills here. And instead of them actually working together on it, they're going in different directions.
Yeah.
Maybe we can just trust them to be honest.
Yeah, the honor system. Eagle Scout.
Is it too much to ask people?
Yes.
All I want you to do is tell me the truth.